Hello, everybody. Welcome to the quarterly State of the Movement meeting. Really excited to see you all here today and to kick off this session, an opportunity for us to learn more about what's going on, ask questions, get inspired by each other, all of the good things. It's been a few months since we've been together in this format, so happy to have some time set aside to spend all together. So my name's Stacy Rutland. I am founder of Income Movement, and about 1.5 years ago, 2 years ago, we recognized that it might be good for the community to be able to come together on a regular basis and have grassroots organizers, policy folks, pilots, funders, whoever it is that's involved in and supporting direct cash, whether it's through a pilot demonstration or working towards policy or any and all of the above, to come together to catch each other up and make sure that we're all kind of at least somewhat coordinated and understanding what everyone's working on, ways we can potentially support and partner and collaborate together. So we have here also Annie. I'm going to let Annie introduce herself real briefly, and then we're going to start to dig into what we're all doing here together.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. I'm Annie. I'm the communications manager for Income Movement, so kind of involved in all the things related to our work and, from social media and newsletters to kind of some of our larger projects, like our interactive story map for the child tax credit, and some newer efforts, which we'll get into later today. So yeah, I'm excited to be here with all of you.
I just dropped a quick note in the chat. If you haven't already, some of you guys know the drill and are already introducing yourselves, where you're at, where you're located. I'm in Portland, Oregon, and Annie is in Austin, Texas. So even our team is split across time zones and geos. Let us know who you are, where you're from, and then of course also some other logistics along the bottom. There's a couple of different tabs. The one probably most important for you guys is the Ask a Question tab. Definitely, if you have a question as we move through the conversation today that you want to make sure we dig into a little bit more, put it into that Ask a Question spot rather than the chat. Most of the time we don't pay attention to the chat because unless it's like, hey, somebody's like, go pay attention to that, somebody just said something cool, just mostly because it's hard to do that and talk at the same time. So if you really want to make sure it gets included, throw it into the Ask a Question. There's also something that might be a little bit different or unique for you guys that's specific to Crowdcast, is that on the Ask a Question, when somebody asks a question, there's actually an opportunity for you to vote up a question. So if you go in there and you're like, oh, somebody already asked my question, I want to vote that up so that it kind of gets prioritized. Or if there's some questions in there that you just think are really interesting, that'll help us also prioritize. So if we don't have a lot of time, we know which ones you guys are most kind of excited about. Okay, so that's some of the logistics, but let's actually move into what we're going to do today here together. As I said at the top of the hour, what we've used this meeting to do historically is to invite lots of different organizations from across the movement to give us some updates. And as we were planning this one, we realized, well, the Basic Income Guarantee Conference just happened, which was a whole lot of amazing programming to be able to hear more about what's happening in the pilot space and the narrative workspace and the policy space. So we thought, well, this might be a really good opportunity to do something that we haven't had a chance to do as much, which is go deeper into one specific area and start to think about the commonalities that we have, no matter what role you're playing in the movement, the commonalities that we kind of share in the work that we do, and thinking in very strategic and also very practical terms, how do we do that work? So we're going to be focusing a lot on coalition building and thinking about narrative change, storytelling, and ultimately, how do we kind of do the education, pass on the word, get more people engaged and involved in this idea, and then give them an action to take that can help them feel like they are dipping their toes into the waters of what basic income is about. We're all doing that in whatever capacity. Elected officials are having conversations with their fellow elected officials. Folks that are just, on the ground having conversations with their families or their neighbors, and all the way to pilots trying to more like formally engage with their community members around these topics. So we're going to go pretty deep into that today, and we'll really start with looking at some of the work that pilots are doing in the space and how can we extrapolate some of the great best practices and kind of experience that's happening on the ground in that space into a more broad interpretation of the work that we're doing. We'll start to look more deeply into storytelling and experience-based conversations versus fact-based and data-based conversations. So it's starting to dig into best practices around human-centered kind of conversations and program design, and then also deep canvassing best practices around how to actually have meaningful conversations with folks, and then also connect that to upcoming days of action. We have the Basic Income March and Day of Action coming up, and other events that folks are in the process of organizing. So how can we also then apply that to specific things that are on our schedule and calendar to do? So that's at a nice high level. Have I forgotten anything, Annie? Is there anything else that I need to on the high level?
I don't think so.
Okay, awesome. So we're going to start, like I said, in the pilot space. And so to do that, to just kind of level set around pilots, we think about pilots as having really kind of 3 to 5 goals that they're working on pretty consistently. And we've been doing more and more work with pilots, income movement specifically, and then also there's a lot more kind of interacting of pilots with other organizations that are doing other parts of work in the space. And so through that, really the kind of crystallized language, well, what's the role of pilots in this movement, and what are the things that they're working on? These goals tend to be, one, get money to people, like walk the talk, just start actually getting money to the people we know that need it as quickly and early as possible. A second goal is related to policy. One side of that is collecting the data as a proof point. And I think many of us in this movement are like, okay, we got a lot of proof. Do we really need more proof? Maybe not. Maybe there's ways to be strategic around what data there's still gaps in that pilots can help us answer certain questions. But another side of the policy piece that pilots are doing amazing work in is thinking about how to actually implement it. So what are the strategies in which you can actually design the policy so that the people who most need it get it, so that you're not creating barriers to access, all of those kinds of things. So how is it getting distributed? What does this mean for other programs, that social safety net programs people are potentially engaged in? Is this counted as taxable income? Like these really very fundamental pieces that we need to make sure we're understanding, and when it comes time for building policy, that it's informed policy. But then there's also the side of like building grassroots, building coalitions of energy, whether it's organizations that are helping run a pilot, or inviting the community members that are participating or not participating directly in the pilot to start to learn more about that. And then also the building of the narrative, the kind of reimagining the narratives out there around people in poverty, and undo many of the harmful narratives around that we live in this assumption that we live in a meritocracy, or people that are living in poverty are there because of their own poor choices, things like that. So those last 2 goals around building coalitions and grassroots community, really constituents to put pressure on elected officials, like prioritize this. This is something that I'm going to bring to me at the ballot box, and I'm going to make decisions on who I vote for based on who's really wanting to tackle a new way of thinking of how our economy can work. So that piece, the grassroots, and then the narrative work, the storytelling is what we'll really focus on today. And to do that, we have an amazing person here with us today. So let's go ahead and bring Khea up I'm bringing her up. Khea. So I'm going to hand this over. Annie's going to actually facilitate this conversation, and Khea and I, Income Movement and the organization Khea works with, we've all been working together for over a year now. And so we want to unpack a little bit of like, how are we working together? What are we doing? And think about what the implications are for broader work in the movement. So I'm going to hand it over to Annie.
Awesome. Great. So I'm going to do a little intro for Khea, because some of you may know her, some of you might not. So Khea is the director at San Diego for Every Child, an organization leading a guaranteed income pilot in San Diego County, providing 150 families with at least one child under the age of 12 with $500 for 24 months. And she is also the co-owner and founder of Cafe X by Any Beans Necessary, which is a family-owned, Black woman-owned cooperative coffee shop that's built to support generational wealth building in the Black community and other marginalized communities. And so Cafe X has partnered with San Diego for Every Child and Jewish Family Service to develop the Black Women's Resilience Project. And that project is to study how guaranteed income paired with culturally relevant social services and networks impact socioeconomic mobility for Black families. So Khea is doing a lot of amazing stuff. And Stacy needs no introduction. I'm sure you all know Stacy she's the founder of Income Movement. And yeah, we'll get into kind of what Income Movement does, what San Diego for Every Child does, and how those goals intersect in this work. So the first question is, I want to talk about engaging in and building empathy. So how is the idea of empathy rooted in the work both San Diego for Every Child does and Income Movement are doing?
I'll tackle that first. And thank you for the amazing introduction. I'm always so shocked when people can give the full scope of the things that we're trying to connect in our region and the work that we do. So it just warmed my heart to hear that. Empathy, for us, it's kind of a twofold process and is still emerging, which is quite exciting. The partnerships that we're building and developing, Income Movement being one of them. But when we think about empathy, we recognize that we have two tiers or two levels and two ways to think about it. The first being helping and having participants or families in our program have empathy for themselves and understand the complexities of the conditions of their environment and be able to articulate that experience in a group. And it's a very intentional and thoughtful process to be able to steward people through that process. So first and foremost, our thoughts and intentions around empathy start there. And through our first of many dialogues with our narrative change cohort, we've been able to unpack kind of the layered narratives that folks have about themselves and their community and really ease into that conversation about how did we get here and what does that mean for us as individuals, as part of a community, and how do we make sense of that within the realm of guaranteed income? So the unpacking and unfolding of that is probably, a 6 to 9 month process for our cohort, but it's really lifelong. And we think about our pilot as in service to that first. And then building empathy on the outside, externally with our partners for the work that we do, to get them to understand that this is not a one-to-one transaction. We're not only supporting families in the short term. This is about the long-term self-sufficiency, the long-term actualization, the long-term outcomes for families. And so when we think about, okay, we're going to provide COVID economic support, a lot of people, they see that and not beyond into the future. And so when we try to build a conversation around empathy, it's about unpacking, again, that complexity, and to say economic stability is the floor, but what else are we trying to do, and what are we in service to as a community? So the conversations that we're planning to have with our stakeholders that are not only partners, but just community members in the very near future have to really dig into what it means to be human, has to dig into not only economics, but the social conditions that we exist in today. So we root in empathy very intentionally and on multiple levels throughout our narrative change work.
I love that. I think that I am so glad that you started with like empathy for yourself. I think that this is a piece that we don't, just as a culture, that we don't really have any practice or intentionality around often. And so sometimes like even just asking that question of, what are you carrying right now? And what does that look like? And what does that mean for your ability to participate in a wide range of things, to show up in a wide range of ways, whether it's for your family, work, community, or a program, whatever it might be. But I just love, it made me think of when we were together doing a community event in San Diego, and towards the end of a like 2-hour time with the community, an older gentleman stood up and he was like, why do we, he's like a grandfather of some, kind of 3 generations at a table. And he stood up and he was like, why do we not think we deserve, and our kids deserve, when we say our kids, it's easier, but why do we think that we don't deserve to have our basic needs met? Like, what's going on with that? And I think that piece of asking those questions, those really core questions, and giving space is just so for an answer that might be about, I do deserve that, or if I can translate that to my kids or my father and mother, why can't I translate it to me? And what's going on with that? Why in our culture do we say that that's not an okay place to be? But I was also, as you were talking, I think, the work the income movement does often, the very first step is just trying to understand where people are at and what their capacity is, and helping meet them at that place, and making space for a wide range of ways for people to participate or engage where that makes the most sense to them. And sometimes it makes the most sense to not engage, like, absolutely. Like, so like, take care of yourself. You're, in many ways, it's like when we're doing things like movement building, what are we actually asking for our community? And how do you make sure that you're minimizing burnout? Every step that people are taking feels like it's a appropriate return on the investment of time and energy that they put into that. And so that means actually being intentional about what you're asking, and then connecting impact, helping people understand, like, you gave this time and here's what it has meant to us in this room, or us as a broader community, or whatever it might be. I also, it wasn't the way that the framing of that you talked about, but you brought up this idea of transaction, like how are we thinking about the way pilots are designed and the transaction process of that, and that you're trying to build a broader understanding in your community that this is a program and it has a timeline to it, but it's much bigger than that. And ultimately the timeline is much bigger than that. It also just made me think transactional. How do we make sure that the way that we work with people isn't transactional? It isn't, I'm going to do this for you, you're going to do this for me, and then we go. What are the other things that we need as a movement, that we need as people, that should be just as important And that's whether that's building community, an opportunity to connect with somebody that you haven't connected with, an opportunity to think in a different way around our own selves. I think that those can be, we often get, and especially in the way our society works and the way movements often work, is like, sign this letter, show up to this event, do this thing, and how can you have it be more than that, worth more than that? I think is really kind of important. And as soon as you're thinking and like empathetically about the folks that are going to be participating in that, it becomes much clearer what you need to add into, or the way you need to think about what you're looking to do or what your goals are. They become much more complex, which sometimes is scary because it's like, oh crap, there's no like way to, how do we measure the impact of this thing that's like, we want people to connect with each other and feel good, or, but like, that's a legit goal when you're thinking about the humans that are at the center of what we're doing. So yeah, I think without empathy, it becomes a very different, and without empathy, I think so much of the work of basic income is rooted in empathy. And so if you're not actually integrating that into everything that you're doing, you're not walking the talk. It's so easy to not help demonstrate the difference culturally of what it means to be having a social contract that's also about making sure people's basic needs and are met. And some of those are financial, but there's lots of other needs too, and we can do that as a community, like help build some of that in.
Mm-hmm. Yes, Stacey, you always get my wheels turning. Seriously. And I'll pass it back to Annie, but I just have to say, everything that you said speaks to the goals of the Black Women's Project specifically. And when I think about the demographics in San Diego County and how the Black community is so small in comparison, we're a pretty diverse region, but the Black community is about 5%, going back and forth between 5 and 6. And it's hard. There's a lot of fractures. There's a lot of deeply entrenched racism in our systems. And unpacking this and building community is so much, it's as important as some of the policy advocacy that we will do around public benefits, around establishing a guaranteed income, because the community is what sustains itself. It's again, that foundation, that stability, and that belonging. And figuring out how to assess that and be really scientific about it is the weird part. And, we have an advisory board of Black women that's helping us design and really thoughtfully integrate that. But the goal is to really develop that ecosystem, because we know that there's intangible benefits to being in community with each other. And the impact of the guaranteed income goes further when you have a network of support around you. And so we're thinking that through consistently, and wanting our partners, the funders, and other community members to understand that that is as important, if not more, in the years to come than receiving these large tranches of funding, ARPA dollars, that helps us get this initial work done. It's this, sustaining a movement is what we're trying to do.
That's right. It makes me think of it at the big conference, which you were able to come up and be a part of, which was fantastic. There was, I think it was during the narrative work, maybe if I'm remembering correctly, in one of the sessions, Cameron Whitten, who's the director of Brown Hope and Black Resilience Fund here in Portland, was there, and he was talking about the critical nature of social capital as in addition to financial capital, and how much, if you have just the financial, you're not really actually understanding the way that wealth building happens in our country. And it really, there's the community side of it. The social capital is just absolutely critical. And how do you make sure that it is integrated in, and that funders understand why that's important. And it's such a amazing piece. And I remember when he started talking about, you were like, yes, like, I want to have a conversation with you. So yeah, awesome.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to open the conversation about building empathy and in the work that both of you do in your organizations. What is the groundwork we're laying upon which we're building these programs and strategies that are actually the day-to-day stuff in accomplishing these goals. But I think that's a really beautiful way to kind of start thinking about what's the actual goal, how do we start easing people in a way that's in the long term, and just getting themselves to ask themselves the question of, why don't I think I deserve this, and building upon that. So I think that's wonderful. And I want to build on that and kind of move a little bit more into the actual kind of program design that you both do to bring empathy in. And so a lot of organizations talk about human-centered design and policy design. So I just wanted to know how that fits into the kind of overall strategy and program design for San Diego for Every Child and Income Movement.
Yeah, absolutely. Human-centered design is a really fancy term, isn't it? And so is design justice, which I resonate with a lot, in that we want the families to be intentionally consulted and building the design as we go. And I think our roots as an initiative help that piece of it. We started at point A, and we're trying to deepen that engagement. And so, for context, San Diego for Every Child was established by a community advisory board as an initiative, and it came out of the pandemic and the direct payments that were made to families during that time. And that's where guaranteed income started to become a conversation. And we've engaged this advisory board at different points in time to consult on program design. And that was, I think, really a good start for us, because we had folks from the YMCA, we had LISC, we had some organizers on the board from ACE, we had groups that serve parents, parent education, Institute for Quality Education locally, and we had an advocacy group, CPI, on the board fighting for policy advocacy in our region, but also providing input on guaranteed income. So these were amazing community leaders that started the conversation. And as we've deepened our work in guaranteed income, we have the necessity of engaging families on the ground became so much more apparent, particularly when we started to do our recruitment together, Income Movement in San Diego for Every Child. And so now, as we think through the next phases and potential expansion of our pilot itself, from 150 to a larger group, should we get the funding to do so, we're thinking about how to leverage our narrative change cohort and the work that we're doing with this cohort, and keeping them involved in the process of not only sharing their own stories, but how are we looking at the data together? How do we want to share this data? How do we want to message it out? Do we want to do a public event and have a discussion around that? What are some important elements of design for the Black Women's Project? How do we connect this narrative change cohort to the advisory board for the Black Women's Project? How do we stay connected to the advisory board from San Diego for Every Child? So I think it's about making sure those intentional linkages are there, not necessarily knowing what the answer is at the outset. I think, when we have enough people in a room and enough people who have lived through the very things that we want to discuss and impact, we have natural conversation and solutions that emerge. So all the steps moving forward are being, really thoughtful between these three groups that we've established. And there's so much more to come and unpack. I can see several ad hoc groups and really incorporating coffee shop conversation and the conversation about development, economic development too, and ownership as part of this conversation as well. So pulling in key themes and making sure that all of this is kind of a full picture as I started out in the beginning. So those are some of the things that we're doing to really make sure that the design is rooted with family lived experience and also experience from Black women as part of our project.
I love that. I was just thinking as you were sharing more of how you guys are going into this kind of storytelling cohort of people who are participating in the pilot with such like clarity of intentionality. And I love that you were like, looking at the data together and making some decisions together. How are we going to actually use this? And I think that when I think of like human-centered design, it's literally just like put the human at the center of every single part of what you're doing. If you have a decision to make, the people who are whether it's your target demographic or it's a group of people who are going to be most impacted by whatever decision you're making, how do you make sure that you're integrating them into that process? And it can look like a lot of different ways. It doesn't have to be even just an act of like consensus, but how do you make sure that you're not missing an opportunity to make a better decision and have other folks help you make those decisions? It shouldn't, there's a burden. We often don't talk about this when we talk about kind of leadership, but there's a burden if you are just up there trying to make decisions, a real burden of making sure that you're doing, especially when it comes to program design or policy design, doing something well. And like, boy, oh boy, I mean, we've seen it over and over again, program design or policy design, a social safety net program that says in theory it's designed to do X or Y, and it sometimes does the complete opposite because of the way it was designed and implemented. And so I just love that you're really with clarity thinking about, in some ways it feels almost like that is part of the long-term process as well, which is how do you equip people to take their own power and make decisions for themselves and for, their community that feels right and is rooted in the shared like values of the community that's involved. I think is just so fantastic. I did also think the piece for us that we just go back to over and over again is trust. And I think that without trust, all of this falls apart, and that empathy and humans, like all of these lenses through which, or frameworks through which we can do our work, at the heart of it, it's just about building trust with people. And through that, especially because so many people in our communities have been burned hard by a wide range, whether it's policy, whether it's a program, whether it's interactions with somebody who has power to make decisions about whether or not they receive something or how their data gets used, right? All of these are moments where people are bringing a pretty broad range of experiences, and if you're not figuring out like what's your assumptions and maybe starting at a baseline and starting to understand some of that, and not only be open, but have those conversations, have the whatever it is that you're building together actually inform, and they can see the impact of their feedback. Like, I just said that thing, and look, now it's up there as one of the goals, or now it's up there, and we're coming back to it over and over again to make sure we're not losing it as we're designing this thing. It's amazing the amount of trust that you can build just by designing appropriately, like thinking about and giving the space and time for that. And that's movement building. I mean, you have people who are like, oh, I give energy into this thing and they care and it's different. And I trust them when they say they're going to do something, it happens. Now when I say I'm going to do something, I need to make sure it happens. Like I want to be protective of this really different experience that I'm having that's actually nourishing me and making me feel good and is additive and inspirational versus taxing and overwhelming and exhausting, you know? So I just always go back to that trust piece that is at the heart of all of this. And, you know, how do you just make sure that you're building in the time? I think for us, it's the biggest challenge over and over again is we're all very anxious to get this shit done, like, right? Like every month that we don't have basic income is a month of like people struggling, falling further behind, a month of people being hungry, you know, a month closer to eviction, whatever it is, another month of just status quo and not feeling like there's something worth kind of working towards. And so it's easy to sometimes be like, no, let's just move through it. Let's just do it. Because we want to get to that thing because this thing is going to impact that thing and we can see the roadmap and let's just move. But without that intentionality, like that can really focusing on empathy, thinking about trust, it kind of just all starts to fall apart. Like you can't build the foundations that quick.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. And going off of that, I would love to just hear, because these things can seem really abstract as principles like trust and empathy. I would love to understand, you know, what kind of examples come out for both of you in your minds as examples of, you know, work or events or partnerships that you've done with community members that have espoused those principles and you know, how those felt and how they went and kind of what the actual brass tacks of doing this type of work looks like.
Yeah, and you know, some of my comments are piggybacking off of Stacy because it's just so relevant. It's seems very esoteric and abstract, and it's really it's just connecting with people. So for example, we had our first narrative change cohort orientation. We had it at the coffee shop. And we had it actually right in the center of the community space. And I mean, there's tons of space. We could have been outside in the outdoor area. We could have been upstairs in a more private area, but we were kind of situated in the center of things. And as we got set up and we had, you know, the food pantry resources, we had food for lunch. We had coloring materials for the kids. We said, everybody bring your kids. We'll have somebody to care for them while they're there. And the kids were running around. They really did bring all the kids. And we just sat in the center of everything. And, you know, people coming in and out of the coffee shop every so often, and people coming from the businesses that are co-located in the space. And I asked, do you all want to stay down here? Or do you want to move upstairs? Like, how are you feeling about being in this space? And we're talking openly about, you know, this program and the experience. And they said, no, we're comfortable here. Like, we love it right here. We were at a long table and folks were drawing, eating, and, you know, just connecting. So it can get super heady when we start to turn these things over in our minds and think about, oh my gosh, you know, how do we go and build trust? You know, you just sit with them and you just talk to them and you ask them what feels good to them and you do what you say you're going to do. Because I mean, we could have canceled that event based on the events leading up to, but we held it and it actually ended up being the right space. So being flexible enough to just feel as a part of this experience and holding space for people to emote because I mean, the things that we heard about how this has impacted folks' lives so far has just been so moving, and being able to keep that, hold space for it, and time and space, to allow that to develop and build on itself is super important, because sometimes we get just really caught up in this seems hard, and it's actually not, when you're in touch with your humanity and when you're able to, integrate that into your work. And sometimes it's environment too. You have to, being in a community space, I think helps. It elicits different feelings, emotions. And I think choosing that and curating that is super important. So there are just aspects of it that, yes, there's planning involved. We do have a timeline. We've got dollars that need to be spent. We will adhere to it, but build in the space to allow the human process to take place. And you're doing that. You're building trust, you're building connections. And these go such a long way to the ultimate goal, which is changing systems. It starts with people.
Yeah, and I do think I agree wholeheartedly, plus heart to all of the everything that Khea was just highlighting. I think that a lot of what income movement does, and a lot of what we've been doing over the last year in work with pilots, is helping build the tools that are the actual like logistic tools of how to do some of this stuff, so that people can focus on those other parts that are really kind of the sweet spot of having a meeting or a session or a workshop or an event end and being like, that was amazing, versus, oh my God, I was always just like kind of drinking from the fire hose and was so worried about like, are these logistics working right, that I didn't have a chance to just be in community together and pay attention and be present in some of that work. And so I do think that, a lot of what we do around like building activities or building toolkits or PM template docs or like all these things that actually like are designed to help make things more straightforward and simple from a planning perspective. Also, at the core of them are designed to be able to give more time and space to people who are doing the work to do these pieces, to like just tap into your humanity. And there's enough flexibility written into this that like, if you're like, oh, shit's going sideways, what am I going to do right now? Like, oh, if you don't have time to do that thing, that's okay. Do this other thing. And like to know that you have, something that you can reference that other folks have done that have worked, and that with lots of kind of flexibility, just like you're saying, then you're giving people the space. And so it is one of the things like that we think about a lot is, when you have a well-designed plan, then you get to just kind of throw it out the door like once it's time, in the sense that like, where you want to get to, how you're going to get there is sometimes a game time decision. You might be in a room and realize like, oh, people are really interested in doing this. They just want to keep talking about and share more of their own personal experiences. And we can't shut that part down, because that's going to be the part that's going to allow them to kind of move with us long term, to come along with us as we do, other things. And so, so I think it's an important, additional piece. And I think that a lot of the time, I think we run across often from kind of feedback or questions from folks within our community and beyond, who bring kind of an attitude of like, empathy is this soft, like woo-woo-y, like what you're talking about is this like these like kind of weird like things that are that aren't like part of like how we do work. But these are actually like the most powerful things. If you look at any movement that has had success, most key inflection points or key growth moments are rooted in empathy, whether it's seen for the first time Black people in the South who are trying to integrate being attacked by dogs, or like, you know, whatever, those things that like all of a sudden people are seeing or recording, you know, police brutality or a death of a young Black man. Like it wasn't until that stuff was being recorded where you're actually in the moment with them and thinking like, what's happening right now, that you see big strides. And so we think about that societally, collectively, and we can point to it, but it's the same with individuals. And if our job and growing this movement is having those moments with people where they make that big stride, and like the role of empathy and helping them understand what they're bringing to the table, what experiences that are informing their own relationship with these ideas, and the experiences of others in their community, in their family, in the room, are actually like fundamental to movement building, and hard, not hard from a planning perspective, but hard for people. Like you're asking people to go deep. I mean, when we talk about, oh, do we live in a meritocracy? For a lot of folks, you're challenging their religion, like Protestant work ethic and value through, and, you know, and obedience to a higher like power, and like your government as, you know, as your head of house. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in there that has been not just generational, but thousands of years imprinted in who we are and how we think societies should and do function best. Like it's understanding that that's some of what's going to come up as you're doing this work. And I think each of us, like everybody that's on this session and people that we work with, like grassroots organizers who are set up a table at a farmer's market and they start talking with people, that's the stuff that comes up. Is like, how do we give space for them to talk about their experiences, but then also be able to insert some empathy for other experiences also, and, you know, and what's the right way to do that, understanding where this person's coming from and where to meet them in the conversation. You know, those are all really critical and tactical, like logistically, tactically very specific, but also high impact.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I love that, and that actually ties really well into the last. I just have one more kind of question for both of you to wrap it up, because I know Khea has to jump off in a few minutes. But I just wanted to ask, you know, because storytelling is such a powerful tool in the work that we all do, you know, and both of you as leaders of your respective organizations, you've both had a lot of experiences in your lives that have led you to where you are now and led you to this work and this mindset of, you know, human dignity and, you know, promoting the principles that, you know, guaranteed income and basic income espouse. And I'm wondering how you navigate telling your own stories in your work, you know, within your organizations, and in your work with community members, you know, and how, you know, do you bring your own experiences to the table? Kind of where's the line for that?
That's such a good question. And it's very unorthodox, which I appreciate. You know, I do it when I feel moved to do it. I most often do it in the coffee shop space. So my desire in bringing in all parts of myself to the project or the program or the objective of guaranteed income is to demonstrate how we're all connected and in what ways we're connected. And we have so much, I think, rich experience in life, and in our passion and our purpose, that really tie into this work. And so I bring in, you know, my goal for establishing a collective economy, a cooperative economy into the work of guaranteed income, because it's so just intrinsically linked, you know? And I feel strongly about justice, just, you know, in my educational practice, but as a Black woman and how I was raised, to be very conscious and cognizant of global issues. And I bring that to the work, and it's definitely why I choose to focus on what I choose to do with guaranteed income, Black families, specifically closing, long-term, long-held disparities in our community, and then connecting across communities to level the playing field. Indigenous communities, other communities of color, marginalized communities as a whole, because I have injustice at the core of all of my work. And so that, to me, I do bring center stage. And it's actually one of the things that we're focused on when we're talking about policy change, moving from trickle down economics to trickle up, which was so eloquently said by one of our families in the audience at one of our community conversations. They said, wow, after watching the film Inherent Good, I can see a trickle up economy and what that means and how we've been doing things as a nation, as a community, and national community has been destructive in my own life. I can put those pieces together. And so as much as possible, I do try to bring in the things that I'm passionate about, because I see a fuller picture and I love connecting those dots. And if I get to be a whole person, I can make space for whole people. And, we have that amazing container that income movement provides, and it's structured and it's beautiful. And so I'm always bringing in myself in different ways. So I like this question.
I do think it's an interesting question also, because I would say, we all bring our experiences into every interaction. So they're there. It's like, how transparent how much do you want to, one, reflect on that, in the moment? How much do you want to reveal or share with the folks that you're in community with? And I think, I definitely think that we, as a society, we often say that that certain kinds of sharing of experiences aren't appropriate, depending on like what your role within an organization is, or your role within a community might be. And I think that, ultimately everybody should bring whatever part of themselves and share whatever experiences they think make sense to them. I think there's a lot of folks who are have had experiences that maybe you need to be in a very specific space and with a very specific kind of community group in order to want to share. And I think, some of Khea, what you're talking about around in those cafe, coming together with folks where you've built a really significant amount of trust, and also we're part of that sharing of similar experiences, helps in the trust building process, and just feels authentic of I'm bringing my whole self to this conversation. It's absolutely appropriate and necessary, I think is right. I think that rooting our work in experience and stories is really important. And a lot of the time we talk about, as a movement, when we talk about storytelling and narrative work, we in particular focus on people who have received money, people who have been participating in pilots and things like that, or received the child tax credit. But ultimately, all of us have stories to tell that reflect what our experience with our current systems looks like. And the more that we want to step into that as a potential part of the way that we do our work, is totally up to each person. But I would also say that I think that people have a pretty broad range of experiences that are relevant and important to the conversation. And what I wouldn't want is for people to diminish their experience because they think that, oh, well, I didn't grow up in poverty, or I haven't been participating in this pilot directly, and so I'm my experience or perspective is less authentic or less, important to this. So I definitely encourage that. I think because we work on the grassroots side of things, it's a lot easier in the sense that one of the things that we want to do is help illustrate ways that we can all show up in different capacities. And so for us, we do, I mean, I write a lot of op-eds, and almost all my op-eds are rooted in my experience. I grew up incredibly poor. I grew up around abuse and violence. You know, my sister had an incredibly abusive partner, and we had to go underground as a family and like live on couches for a very long time and quit schools and quit jobs. Like those are real things that may mean that when I talk about violence against women, when I talk about what is at the heart of like money is power and money is freedom, those are the lenses. They're pretty extreme that I'm thinking of. And I think that doesn't mean that other experiences aren't just as important or valuable, but I also I don't want to ask somebody else to share that if they don't feel comfortable sharing it. I'm willing to be somebody who goes there, you know. I mean, with Roe being overturned, I wrote an op-ed around my abortion and what that meant to me and why I had it and what I think about right now when I think about women not having that access. That's putting yourself out there in ways that I don't want other women to shoulder alone that burden, you know. And so I think it's a pretty broad range. I'd say that from a like, where's my line? My line is pretty far over in the like anything kind of goes. If it's, you know, I feel like it's going to be helpful. I'm not, you know, I'm not as I've processed a lot of it, so it's easier for me to just be very straightforward and transparent. But I do think this is an important question. This movement of like, what are my experiences and how do they affect what I'm going to be doing? I know we're at the top of the hour. I know you have to.
I know. I have so much more to say.
Yeah.
Well, thank you both so much for sharing everything that you shared and, you know, just kind of continuing to illuminate how we do this work and how we kind of take one step after another towards creating a better system and a better world that's rooted in empathy. So thank you both so much. And I'll let you go, Khea, because I know you've got the next thing to run to.
Thank you, Khea. It was lovely spending time with you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
All right, I'll hand it over to you.
Awesome. So the next piece that we're going to actually talk about is like, how do we go a little bit deeper into this storytelling and narrative side of things? And so I'm going to invite Rennie Soga up. I'm going to have to ask her if it's Soga or Soga because I always butcher it. Or I think I'm butchering it. So.
No worries. Hi, everyone.
Yeah. Rennie works in the film space. She's an impact producer, and I'm sure that we'll have a chance to like understand a little bit more contextually what that means. She is the creative driving force behind Inherent Good. She would never say it, but everybody else who worked on the film says it all the time. So I'm going to echo that. And Inherent Good was the first documentary about basic income in the United States. We've had a chance to share that with the community multiple times and have panel discussions and dig deeper into it. She does in the broader work that Rennie does, she focuses on championing stories that use narratives to shift power towards justice and equity. So, of course, totally aligned with and the kind of core of what we're going deeper into. And we thought we would just spend a little bit of time with Rennie here to talk about how she thought about kind of the framing for Inherent Good and kind of the work that she does as obviously a filmmaker, but also just as an activist and advocate for basic income around these ideas of narrative work, storytelling, sharing other people's stories, elevating voices, things like that, as well as some other pieces. So welcome, Rennie. It's good to have you.
Thank you for having me. Hi, everyone. It's great to be in community with everyone again.
Yeah. So I think a good place to start would just be to understand, you really were the impetus behind Inherent Good. And really that film could have, as the first basic kind of documentary about basic income, you really could have taken almost any approach on that. So
Yeah.
help us understand how you chose to frame it, why you did that.
Yeah, well, thank you again for having me and allowing me to join this discussion. You're right. I mean, you can really come, anybody who's familiar in this community with UBI, you definitely know you can come at it through different angles. And initially, through our discovery, we were thinking about, well, if it's the first sort of US documentary about basic income, we should probably be the primer. So we thought about, all the UBI experts, we've interviewed them, we casted them. And it's really when we started to dig deeper into people's personal stories and then really starting to speak to those in the nonprofit space, and getting access to people's stories, we really knew that we wanted to, as we discussed, like go in at the empathy level, and then sort of focus in on centering people's stories. And we had always known that we wanted to, as we did our research, there were some gaps in the space as far as when we think of films, you kind of think of that marketing funnel as like at the top, we're talking about awareness, right? And we're trying to move people through that funnel. We're trying to change minds, change opinions, and then sort of convert them to the idea. And we thought, well, at the very top, how are we going to make people, how are we going to like not only educate and bring awareness to this idea that seems a bit abstract, we thought, well, we need to root it in reflecting people's stories, everyday, ordinary American stories back to people. Obviously, there's some stories in there that I personally resonate with me, that are close to my own personal story and for why I'm an advocate for UBI and have been for the last 8 years. And why I decided, instead of becoming, I'm not an organizer, I'm not a Stacey Rutland, I was like, well, I can tell a story that's going to not only elevate and amplify, underrepresented voices, but it's also going to challenge some social norms and some biases, and also hopefully help people point to systems rather than each other. So, it was a long road, but we eventually came from making a primer to, we need to center the exploration of UBI in the States through people's stories. And hopefully that comes across.
It does. I'm just going to drop in here a great little clip. The film, I just want to make sure that people know. So the film is there, and there's lots of ways to get the film. If you haven't had a chance to watch it, definitely do. If you have a library card, you probably have access to it via Canopy, which is like it's like a Netflix for folks that's attached to libraries. So you can definitely do that. And we also have, it's also just available to purchase on any place that you can go, the Amazons of the world. But there's also a really great short clip that you guys have pulled together of just highlighting some of the stories. And you guys were lucky enough to be able to film the very first cohort of moms that were going through the Magnolia Mothers Trust program. And so so much of what you have highlighted there and that you used as that kind of grounding in experience kind of came from that.
Yes, and working with Aisha Nyandorov, who heads Magnolia Mothers Trust and is featured in our film, I mean, I learned so much from her as far as, when she started to think about narrative change. And it wasn't the language she was using at the time when we first met her, but it was definitely rooted in all the work, because she was like, it's about my mothers. It's about giving them visibility, equity. And, it wasn't about her. She was like, we're talking about how important it is to have these counter narratives, to allow people, the Magnolia Mothers Trust recipients, to be able to tell their own stories and their own truths. And that's the whole part of narrative change work, right? Is to provide these counter narratives, people's truths that challenge these very harmful false narratives that we're all working against. And that's kind of, as storytellers, what we try to do is we're trying to provide a counter narrative, which is going to help inform public opinion, which will eventually hopefully impact policy. So I have Aisha to thank for that, for really opening my eyes and giving me an education around that. And she's really trying to do that for her community members as well, is we all need, you know, political education and awareness. And how do we, you know, provide people with the tools to be able to frame this UBI in a way that, you know, we can eventually put into policy that doesn't have this like knee-jerk response, which is what our film is about, and why we're showing a town like Salina and saying, hey, look, at no fault of their own, this community was impacted by this factory closing. And, you know, and there were no safety nets in place for this town. And then showing Mississippi, where they are doing something about it. Aisha and Magnolia Mothers Trust are providing resources to under-resourced community members and helping them not just to survive, but to thrive, and then helping them tell their stories. And so, you know, as storytellers, we're really trying to change hearts and minds, really, and we hear it a lot. But it really is, you really need to open hearts and minds before you try to introduce something like UBI. And that's why we're talking about empathy, why we're talking about narrative change work alongside all of the advocacy, activist work, activations that we're doing, campaigns that we're running, you know, all the work that Income Movement's doing. You know, it's so important, but it needs to be in tandem with narrative change work. Mm-hmm.
I was just thinking, as you were, you know, some of the next couple of years, as more pilots move into the distribution phase, which once there's a distribution phase, that's often when they start to do their narrative cohorts and, you know, and kind of advisory boards and things like that. And so I imagine and anticipate that over the course of the next 12 months, there's going to be a lot more stories to hear, and to understand. One thing that I think is important, and especially for those of us who aren't involved in pilots but are doing advocacy work and having conversations regularly with people, whether it's, you know, my mom or my neighbor or another organization that's in my region that's, I think, might want to learn about basic income, is how do we actually share stories, other people's stories, in a way that's not reductive, that's not, you know, making it so that this person is just their story of poverty or just their story of, you know, of struggle. And it's an important piece for us to just be really conscious of as a community when we do this work, what the difference between shining a spotlight on and somebody's and elevating their voice, you know, giving them a platform, whatever it might be, and speaking for them or summarizing what you saw, you know, and those are really kind of critical pieces. And I love, it's one of the reasons I like sharing the short clip of stories, you know, folks who are on this call and folks that are going to watch this over time. I think having, we know that in the work we do when we have a conversation with somebody, giving them something that's bite-sized for them to kind of dig into a little bit, that's not like, go and watch this, you know, 3-hour webinar or whatever, but it's just like, it's one of the lovely things about Inherent Good that it's 60 minutes, which actually feels doable. But even smaller, these, you know, the 5-minute clip that you guys have created of like an entry point into, but it's not up to me to summarize the experience of these women that are going, you know, that went through. Here's just a clip, just watch it, listen to their own voices, watch their own experience for a minute. I think is just so important. And these tools that you are helping provide to do that is like fundamental to our work.
Thank you. Yeah, I all the credit really goes to those Magnolia Mother Trust recipients for even trust. I mean, we were talking about trust, but they in the filmmaking process, there's a lot of trust and relationship building that you must cultivate and nurture for many years. And so, Aisha was so gracious for allowing us to even have access to some of those mothers while she was in the throes of her first cohort of women. And yeah, we were very sensitive about and intentional about how we were sharing the stories. We were always in constant communication with the recipients, but also we didn't have to fabricate a transformational story. All three of the women that we got access to had transformative stories. And I think that's really important when you're doing narrative change work, when you're thinking about not perpetuating, these stereotypes or these narratives about those who live in poverty, those who are struggling. You also need to show the transformation. And with the basic income, you're going to get transformative stories. And that's what we got. And that wasn't anything that we edited or did any editing magic. It was just them telling their stories, showing their joy, showing the relief, showing and just talking about how they're showing up for themselves and for their families and for their community. And then Aisha just sort of echoes that in that sort of part 3 or act 3 of the film. And we just kept the cameras rolling. And it was such an honor to be able to play witness to some of their stories. Yeah, because it was incredibly powerful. Just giving people additional resources and agency and empowering them to tell their stories. I think, it's definitely the feedback we've been receiving the past, 18 months or so has been incredible. And it says that these stories really resonate with the average viewer. So we need to keep telling them.
Yeah. So you are you do work as an impact producer. And so I want to just make sure, because this is not only your baby, kind of through the entire process, but what's your goal or vision or hope for? And I think this is a good thing to piggyback on the question that the audience put into the Q&A is if they wanted to do a watch party, can we access the documentary through the site? So this maybe is like a great segue into what's your hope for the film, and like how do you do that work?
Well, our pipe dream was to connect it to a movement. In 2017, when we were in beginnings of production, there wasn't an income movement, and we knew it was coming along, but we just didn't know when. And we always, and this is our truth, we always say we made the film. As you can see, it's an advocacy film. It's not a traditional documentary. It's an advocacy film for basic income. And we made it for the movement, and we're doing that right now. So, thank you to Income Movement and to all our community partners that just are making our pipe dream come true, because, we really wanted to just give this film as a tool to all community members who are doing this work around guaranteed income and basic income, and just saying, here's the film, use it if it helps you elevate the work that you're doing. And we're continuing to do that work with Income Movement and also with San Diego for Every Child. So we're working with Khea as well. But yeah, we're actually living it right now. This is absolutely what we hoped would happen. And so if you want to watch the film, you want to host your own watch party, community screening, just reach out. I'll drop our email into the chat. And just reach out and we can get you a copy of the film. We can help support your community screening. But just reach out to us. We'll work with any organization, any individual to get the film in your hands so you can use that and spark another conversation in your community. So thank you to Income Movement and the community for supporting this film. It was a film made by the community, supported. People probably on this call right now have supported or donated it or given time or advice to the film. So it's a community film made by the basic income community. So we're really proud of that, and we hold a lot of gratitude in our hearts for the support. So any way we can help, reach out. I'll put her email in here now.
Catherine just asked if you are going to do a follow-up, and this is a question I ask Rennie and Steve and Chris, who are all kind of part of the production and directing team. I know I've had enough conversations that I've heard there is a lot of footage out there, and that when it came time to actually do the editing and get something out the door, you definitely felt like, okay, let's get this into something that can help us do these goals that we're talking about, be a tool that is useful for the movement, that, you know, does all these pieces and are a piece of advocacy. But I'm like, I want to see, I've heard so much different footage. I'm like, I want to see that footage. I really want to see that. So do you have any plans for either a next version of stuff that you already had, or a next film on basic income in some capacity?
We do have a lot of footage that was left on the floor, unfortunately, but you know, we would love to do something again, but I think it's just a matter of resources. And you know, right now I'm supporting 2 other films, but I would love to. I'm always willing to have a conversation with folks in the community who are like, hey, maybe we should create some content together around, you know, guaranteed income or basic income. I'm always open to that. And so if anyone reach out, I dropped the email if you want to create some short content together, please reach out. I'm open to that. And I know we need a lot more content stories out there coming out from our communities and the communities that we support. So yeah, reach out. I love a good collaboration, especially with basic income movement community. So
nice.
I'm always game.
Sweet. Awesome. Well, I think it's a good transition into, like, what is it that's happening in the broader community? How do we think about taking some of these great conversation topics, resources, all of these things, and actually integrate them into the work that we're doing? And so we've pulled together a strategy, kind of an advocacy strategy and approach document, and maybe we'll share our screen. We'll see. I'm having problems sharing my screen, but I think Annie's still in the background, gonna do some magic. We can share. We just shared the link in the chat around this, but I think it would be great for us to actually talk in a very practical terms, like, now that we've had some good conversations with folks who are doing important work, like, how do we do something with this? So let's see if Annie, you might have to be up on the screen in order. Oh, there you are. Okay, sweet. Okay, so the one thing, if we scroll up to the top, I think some of what's most important here for us to do kind of together is just the overall structure of this. And really, this is some frameworks for all of us, anybody, whether, like I said, you're an elected official, or you lead an organization, or you are a participant in a pilot, or you're a grassroots advocate who has conversations with folks. Everybody is doing advocacy, basic income advocacy, all the time, and for lots of different audiences, to community members, types of folks. So starting to just get clear about what we're actually talking about, and what are some ways that we all can just help frame our work. These are really just based on and rooted in some of the things we've talked about today, and what we've seen seem to have the biggest impact in the broader community building work that is happening out there across the movement. So the goals of basic income advocacy are pretty straightforward potentially, but like we've talked about, they're rooted in important, really kind of important values. So engaging humanistically with people and have authentic conversations that help them think more deeply about the role of our systems as they intersect with humans is really, obviously this kind of foundational piece of, like, empathy and human-centered kind of approaches to work. Digging into how our economy works or doesn't work for the vast majority of our community members, families, and neighbors. So really, helping people understand what the problem is, defining the problem, inviting people to explore basic income as a potential solution or a building block towards supporting and improving the problem, and then giving people some kind of action or next step. So, and I think this is the piece that often we don't have or don't include in our process. We have really great conversations, but then like, how do you give them something that allows them to then get connected to beyond just the conversation, connected to what's actually happening. So there's some basic, like, kind of core ways that we can do this work, you know, and listening with an open mind, asking lots of questions. This is really very, very significantly rooted in deep canvassing and what's been an important part of movement building, you know, over the last, you know, 5 to 10 years. Connecting people, and really here, the story piece. We spent a bunch of time talking about stories, because what we actually find, even with people like Manchin, stories, you know, Senator Manchin was more moved by individual stories than data when it came to like making some of the decisions that he finally, at least in some areas, has come around to, it looks like. And so how do you, we know that people have are bringing their own stories. They're bringing an emotional relationship to a lot of these ideas. How do you make space for that, and make space in a way that really is like authentic to who they are as humans? You don't have to like agree with it, but to give space for that to be part of what's happening in the dialogue, and knowing that a lot of the time, until people share that, they can't even hear. Like, it's hard for them to even listen if they haven't had a chance to kind of get their own stuff out. And then, you know, ultimately, and this is something that Rennie, you know, and the film Inherent Good does a great job, and it was part of some of the Basic Income Guarantee Conference sessions that happened in June this year. This idea of making the system the problem, not people. You know, the minute we start to root this in, or like pit people against each other, oh, what wealthy people aren't paying their fair share, and poor people, you know, just need to like suck it up and start working more, or whatever it is. When we're rooted in that, that can often lead to really kind of going nowhere, and not doing the thing that we're really trying to do, which is get at the human impact of these things and how can we change that experience. And ultimately, we know at the heart of this is systems, and how we decide to set up our systems, and how we decide to communicate with those who helps create and enforce the systems, how we communicate what we think needs to be changed. And really ultimately thinking about data and the more kind of brain side of how do you move, you know, the minds and not just the hearts, that's what you follow with, but you lead with the stories, you lead with the experiences, you lead with their own, you know, their own kind of relationship, because that's basically, I mean, realistically, that's where most people start. So if we don't start there also, then we're trying to meet them. They're all up, you know, emotionally attached to something, or they're talking about and thinking about their own experiences, and you're coming at them with data, and it's just like this total, you know, disconnect. And then you're like, why aren't they hearing what I'm saying? These are all very kind of straightforward pieces, but we thought pulling them together in one place, like whether you're hosting an event, whether it's a conversation with your neighbor, or whether you're designing and editing a film, right? Like, these are all things that can help you from a framing perspective, think about that. But this is also, we want to just highlight that we have the Basic Income March coming up. We have, you know, we think about it as the Basic Income March and Day of Action, because for many folks in our community, it doesn't manifest as a march. And so, so as we think about the conversations that we've had, and we think about events that are upcoming, opportunities for events, or opportunities to participate in, you know, in different community conversations, let's think about how we can bring some of these building blocks into that work. We do have an open letter. If you're on our news, if you get our newsletters, one of the actions, we recognize that it's really important to have a letter that is just a letter where people can say, I believe in basic income and I want my elected officials to put energy behind this. We just launched this broadly across the movement, across the community in the last few days. I think we have over 700 folks who have signed it just as we put it out into a couple of channels. But this is something that we imagine will grow over time. If you're having a conversation with somebody and they're like, okay, that's interesting. I get where you're coming from. Being able to say, like, add your name to this letter, then it's going to help. Like, it's going to make it so that when folks are having conversations with your senator, your voice is going to matter. Your name is going to count here. And we anticipate that this will be something that will grow. It'll be our primary engine, moving forward. It means that we'll grow to, hopefully at some point, it would be amazing if we had hundreds of thousands of people who have signed this. And what's great about this is you can sign it as an individual. You can also sign it as a representative of an organization. You can sign it as an elected official. So we're actually gathering signatures all across, like, lots of different sectors of our society that all can play different roles in how we advocate. So definitely, that's a very long link to that PDF version of the open letter. It's like a paragraph over there. That's awesome. So next week, we'll be starting to kick off supporting community members and around the Basic Income March and Day of Action. And so we'll drop a link into, and we'll also follow up to everybody who registered and participated in this session, some links so that we can start having conversations, not only about what people want to do, but how people might want to do that work as we get out into our communities and kind of figure out how our pathways into conversations make the most sense and can have the biggest impact as we do our work. So we'll follow up, like I said. Thank you, everybody. We've come to the top of our 90 minutes together. This has been a great conversation. It was kind of fun to not be the person asking questions, but to have somebody ask questions and just be in a conversation with Khea was like fantastic. Thank you for being here. Thank you for all the work that you do. I know that a lot of what we talked about here is stuff that's already in your DNA and how you do your work. Sometimes just writing it down or codifying it can just help us. It helps us on our side at Income Movement to just be a little bit more intentional. And sometimes even after the fact to look back and be like, did we do those things? Oh my gosh, we did, without even necessarily being deeply focused on it. Like, we accomplished a lot of the things that we just know are at the heart of what we want to do. So really appreciate you all and look forward to the next conversations about the Day of Action in March or any other kind of different activities and events we have planned over the next coming month. Thanks, you guys. Thank you, Rennie. Thank you, Annie. Appreciate it. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.